We've all witnessed the lavish victory feasts depicted in films, the resounding clank of drinking horns, the revelry and mountains of gold heaped high. But there's a narrative that unfurls in the aftermath of such celebrations, one that often goes untold. This is the story of the noble women queens, princesses, and daughters of chieftains whose halls have just been conquered. Their fate is not just a footnote in history. It was a calculated strategy. This is not a tale of romance or heroic rescue. It's about what transpires once the cheers fade and the real cost of defeat becomes apparent. We will delve into the fates of 7 such women and their harrowing experiences. If you appreciate documented history like this, consider subscribing. It's the best way to support our work. Also, let us know from which city you're hearing this story. This script is thoroughly researched, drawing on sources like the Annals of Ulster and the Laxdæla saga. Now let's continue. 1. The Women of Ire, 821 AD, Irish coast. The Annals of Ulster provide a stark entry for the year 821. Idia was plundered by the heathens, and they carried off a great number of women into captivity. Today, what was once a prominent settlement known as Howth was strategically situated on a peninsula guarding the northern approach to Dublin Bay. This raid was not random. It was a targeted acquisition of valuable resources. In the 9th century, one of the most precious of these resources was people. The captured women, stripped of their identities in a single brutal sweep, were classified under Norse law as thrills, the lowest rank in society, relegated to a status of property rather than personhood. Their grim journey into servitude began aboard a longship, crammed together like cattle. The journey across the North Atlantic was merciless. Only the resilient survived the harsh crossing. Their likely destination was Dlin, the burgeoning Viking port that would evolve into modern Dublin, known for its thriving slave market where they would be sorted, valued, and sold. A healthy young woman could command a price between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, the equivalent of the annual output of a small farmstead. They were purchased by Norse settlers in Ireland or shipped further afield to markets in Hedeby and Denmark, all the way to Birka in Sweden, and even trafficked along river routes to the expansive slave economies of the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Their skills in weaving or medicine, once indicative of high status, now merely enhance their price tags. The annals do not mention a single name. These women exist only as a number in historical entries, their individual lives erased and subsumed into the economic machinery of the Viking world. Confiscated, inventoried, silenced. 2. Melora, daughter of Murkjartan. Mid-10th century, Ireland to Iceland. The Laxdæla saga, written 2 centuries later, captures the name of one captured noblewoman, Melora, the daughter of an Irish king, Murkjartan. Around 956 AD, her life shattered under the weight of a Viking raid. Taken captive, she was shipped to Norway and sold in a bustling market. There, she caught the eye of Hoskuld Dalakollin, a wealthy Icelandic chieftain on a trading expedition authorized by King Khan of Norway. Struck by her beauty, Hoskuld asked the merchant for her name, only to hear the merchant claim ignorance. Hoskuld paid 3 marks of silver for Melora, an astronomical sum, equating to 24 ounces of pure silver, 3 times the price of a prime milk cow. With this price, he also bought her silence. For the duration of the journey to Iceland and for years thereafter, Melora chose not to speak. Living in his hall as a concubine, she bore him a son they named Olaf. Everyone, including Hoskuld, believed she was mute, but this was her armor, a desperate strategy to retain some semblance of her former self in a world where she held no power. Her true identity surfaced by sheer chance. One day, while walking near a stream, Hoskuld overheard Melora teaching their young son her native language, Gaelic. The saga recounts her words, revealing that his grandfather was Murkjartan, king of the Irish. Though her status improved slightly within the household, she was never freed. Melora remained a captive princess in Iceland, with her true identity discovered only by accident. Her son, Olaf, would grow up to be a notable chieftain, known as Olaf the Peacock for his splendid attire. He eventually sailed to Ireland, where he met his grandfather and was recognized as Irish royalty, yet Melora never returned home. She died in Iceland, far from the kingdom she was destined to inherit, bought, hidden, revealed. 3. The Abbess of Coldingham, 870 AD, Northumbria, Scotland. In the autumn of 870 AD, the great heathen army, notorious for its ravaging of England, set its sights on the north. Commanded by the infamous sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan, they marched toward Coldingham Monastery, a sacred site home to both monks and nuns perched on a windswept cliff overlooking the North Sea. Abbess Iba, the younger, understood the impending doom. Viking raids on religious houses were known for both plunder and the systematic rape of the women inside. For Iba and her nuns, this fate was worse than death. It was a violation that could taint their very souls. As the Viking army approached, Iba gathered her sisters in the chapter house. The account recorded by 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris in Florey's Historiarum is unflinching. In a horrific act of defiance, she took a razor and, in front of her community, sliced off her own nose and upper lip, transforming her face into a bloody mask. She commanded her nuns to do the same, declaring that they should make themselves a spectacle of horror to repel their would-be attackers. One by one, they followed her example. When the Vikings finally stormed the monastery and burst into the chapter house, they were met not with trembling victims, but with a silent assembly of intentionally disfigured women. Cheated of their prize and furious at this act of rebellion, the invaders showed no mercy. They barred the doors, piled timber against the stone walls, and set the building ablaze. The abbess and her entire community perished in flames. Their final choice was not simply between life and death, but between two forms of death. They chose the fire, unbroken even in their demise, their ashes mingling with the soil of their homeland. If you value this in-depth, documented history, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps keep this channel alive. Share in the comments where you're watching from. The script draws from sources like Matthew Paris's chronicle and archaeological findings from Viking-era settlements. Now, back to the story. 4. The women of Canterbury, 1011 AD, Kent, England. For nearly 3 years, a large Danish army under the command of Thorl the Tall had been ravaging southern England. King Thellard, the unready strategy of paying increasingly larger sums of Danegeld had failed, merely encouraging more attacks. In September 1011, Thor's forces laid siege to Canterbury, the ecclesiastical heart of England. For 20 days the city held out against fierce defense, but ultimately, it was betrayed from within by a man named Elfair, whose life had been previously saved by Archbishop Glia. The Vikings burst through the city gates, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the grim aftermath. They captured Archbishop Glia, Elfair, Abbess Lepraine of St. Mildred, and Godwin, Bishop of Rochester, essentially the entire leadership of the city. While many men were slain, the noble women like Abbess Lepraine and Elf Cafu were not killed. They were far too valuable. Instead, they became hostages, bargaining chips in the brutal negotiations that ensued. For months, the army held them captive. Archbishop Glia famously refused a ransom, declaring he would not have his freedom bought with the church's money. In April 1012, during a drunken feast in Greenwich, the frustrated Vikings killed him, murdering him for his steadfastness. The fate of the women was quieter but no less terrifying. They became part of the price for peace. The following year, an astounding 48,000 ounces of silver was paid to Thor's army to secure their departure, and the freedom of these high-status women was almost certainly part of that transaction. Their lives calculated as mere line items in a national ransom payment, they were pawns in a high-stakes game, their survival hinging on the weight of silver and the whims of their captors. Captured, ransomed, erased. 5. The captives of Dumbarton Rock, 870 AD, Strathclyde, Scotland. While Halfdan and Ivar's army burned monasteries in the east, another Viking force attacked from the west. Led by Olaf the White, the Norse king of Dublin, and his ally Ivar, their target was Alclut, today known as Dumbarton Rock, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Strathclyde. For 4 months, the fortress endured a brutal siege. The attackers couldn't scale the rock, so they surrounded it, cutting off its water supply. The Annals of Ulster record that after 120 days, the well inside the fortress ran dry and the defenders surrendered. What followed was one of the largest slave-taking events of the Viking Age in Britain. Olaf and Ivar spent the winter on the Clyde, gathering plunder. In 871, a fleet of 200 ships sailed back to Dublin, their holds filled with treasure and human captives. The annals state they brought back a great booty in people: Angles, Britons, and Picts. Among the captives was the king of Strathclyde, Arthur, his wife, and the other noble women of the court. Arthur would later be killed in Dublin at Olaf's orders. For these women, their noble status meant little. They became mere cargo, assessed for value at the Dublin slave market. This episode illustrates the scale and organization underlying Viking slaving. This was not a byproduct of raids. It was the primary goal: sieged, parched, transported. 6. The wives of the settlers. Late 9th century Iceland, the Landnam Mabok, or Book of Settlements, recounts the colonization of Iceland, often framed as a tale of brave explorers seeking freedom. However, it also provides stark evidence of how this new society was built with stolen women. The saga of Ingolfr the Old, a powerful chieftain from Norway, illustrates this grim reality. Before settling in Iceland, Ingolfr and his men, including his foster brothers, launched raids on Ireland. The Landnam Mabok states plainly, they returned with captives, one of whom was an Irish noblewoman named Riofrid. Known for her beauty and grace, Riofrid became the wife of a Viking named Vidar Sorkvir in the harsh new land. Another chieftain, Ketil the Foolish, settled in Carvelnes, but because he was a Christian, no heathens were willing to inhabit the area. His descendants, however, married into families whose matriarchs were captured Irish women. Genetic evidence supports these narratives. Modern DNA studies show that while most male Icelandic settlers had Norse paternal ancestry, up to 63% of the original female settlers had maternal ancestry from Ireland and Scotland. The statistics are brutally revealing. For every chieftain who established a farm, there were often women taken by force from their homelands, brought to become unwilling wives and mothers. They were the foundation of a new nation, a foundation built on violence, plundered, transported, and replanted. 7. The Lady of the Oseberg Ship, 834 AD to Vestfold, Norway in 1904, archaeologists? Excavating a large burial mound near the Oslo Fjord in Norway uncovered the most spectacular Viking artifact ever found, the Oseberg Ship, perfectly preserved in clay. This 21-meter-long oak vessel was breathtakingly ornate, its prow carved into the shape of a coiled serpent. Inside lay a burial chamber worthy of royalty. Dated to the summer of 834, it was filled with treasures. A richly decorated wooden cart, ceremonial sledges, beds, chests, tapestries, and the remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. Within the burial chamber were the skeletons of 2 women, one elderly, between 70 and 80 years old, likely a woman of immense power, perhaps a queen or a priestess. For decades, it was assumed that the younger woman, around 50, was her high-ranking servant or companion who chose to follow her mistress into the afterlife. However, modern science now presents a more chilling possibility. Analysis of the younger woman's mitochondrial DNA revealed a rare genetic marker, hop group U7, commonly found around the Black Sea in Iran, but exceedingly rare in Scandinavia. This evidence suggests that she was a foreigner, possibly a noble woman captured in a raid and forced into servitude in the household of the powerful Oseberg queen. Her life in Norway was one of relative privilege compared to that of a Ryle, but she remained property nonetheless. When her mistress died, her life was also forfeit. It is likely she was sacrificed, whether willingly as part of a ritual or not to serve in death as she had in life. The lavishness of the burial reflected the status of her owner, not her own. Her presence in that magnificent tomb speaks not of loyalty, but of the ultimate act of possession, bound, buried, and forgotten. The ongoing stories, these tales do not end here. In 2009, workers constructing a relief road for the 2012 Olympic Games in Dorset, England, stumbled upon a mass grave on Ridgeway Hill. Within a pit lay the skeletons of 54 young men, all executed around the year 1000. The bodies had simply been discarded, but the skulls were piled separately to one side. Analysis of their teeth revealed they were all Scandinavian, with one hailing from north of the Arctic Circle. They were a Viking warband captured and systematically executed by local Anglo-Saxons. Their stories, like those of the women we've explored, are powerful reminders of the complexities of conquest, survival, and the often overlooked fates of those caught in the tide of history.